I think that people have an idea that there is one kind of mind, one kind of mentality that is attracted to the military, and that's not necessarily true. It can be true. I do understand it, and maybe in this day and age, it's more true than certainly when my father went into the war. But my father was in 3 wars, and he was a massive lefty. He was the most politically open-minded liberal person, and he used to say no one hates war more than a soldier. He helped my brother get conscientious objector status during Vietnam. He would have helped him get into the war if my brother had felt that was what he was compelled to do politically and ideologically. So I did not grow up in a conservative household at all. I grew up in a household where there was a very strong code about honor and about morality, which is a tricky word, but it wasn't honor that I necessarily equate with the military itself. I equate it with my father and his spirit and who he was. And it would have been like that had he worked in a deli, had he been a lawyer. That's just who he was. And he was quite uncommon. He was open to everyone, and he was a feminist, and he was, all of my friends who were gay, if you were transgender, I had a friend who came to dinner one night who brought his girlfriend who was in the 80s. There were these people they were called walk-ins, and they said their bodies had been invaded by aliens. And my dad just, talked to her. He was really interested in her. And I said, what did you think about her? He said, she was a perfectly nice girl, and what do I know? Maybe she was, It's just really, unless you were really right-wing, or he could sometimes bristle at people who were maybe a little too forthcoming about their wealth. People who were very into talking about sports clubs and vacations, and he didn't like to hear people bragging about money and things like he. But I think that's kind of a right-wing thing. He always associated that with, and he wasn't into that. So there is a perception of the military that's not entirely true. I understand where it comes from, but it's not 100% accurate. My father had retired from the military when I was 4, but that still, the residue of that remained. It lingered and it hung in the air, his experience in the war, and it was something, unnameable that was very often came out in his behavior in a really negative way, in a very frightening way, in a very upsetting way. And I was always able to separate that behavior from my father himself. And I don't think it's because I was an exceptionally perceptive child. I think it's because my father, the spirit of who he was so strong and so indomitable that shone through. And I knew who he was as a person. And I knew there was this other thing that sort of would come into the room that was like a fog, that he was not in control of, that he was not proud of, that it was almost like he wasn't driving the car anymore. And I knew, it's a rather pedestrian way of saying it, but I knew it wasn't his fault. Do you know what I mean? I knew that wasn't him. And as he grew older and mellowed, and those experiences receded a little bit as other ones became sort of more into the what he was. Do you know what I mean? That sort of went away somewhat. And that other person was able to resonate much more. And I wasn't necessarily afraid of that other thing coming back so much. And that also is a testament to his spirit, and that he was intelligent, and he was always trying to better himself, and always reading, and he was an amazing listener, and was so grateful. He really had gratitude, some sort of art form, and generosity, and I think those things over time, rather than him, they grew him, and I think over time, as people tend to sometimes their spirits diminish, or they stop looking and moving past themselves, his spirit only got larger, and it sort of eclipsed that difficult part, that hard part that I grew up with, that trails me as well now as part of me, and that can only be the result of a 19-year-old, very sensitive boy going into the war at a time when that was the honorable thing to do. That was not necessarily expected, fairly expected, but it was the honorable thing to do. When people think of war, people think of movies, people think of games, people think sometimes of photographs, people think sometimes of stories, but in general, I think they think of things which are one step removed from what war actually is. And if you actually delve into that and you think of the Korean War, for example, and walking through, 30 below zero, and the ground is littered with men, most of whom under the age of 30, many of whom under the age of 25, their bodies blown to bits, that have also been stripped of their clothes so that other people could use their clothes, and they're frozen. That's not the kind of thing people think of in terms of reality. They think maybe it brings up an image they saw in a movie, a game, or something, but they don't think of it as reality. And in the 40s, I think it was partly because there wasn't a widespread depiction of it in the media. Do you know what I mean? It was something imagined, which I think is always a million times more potent, the imagination. No one was FaceTiming from the war. No one was calling from the war. No, you waited for letters. You waited for, cryptic descriptions of what was horrific, and inferences, which were, like put ice in your veins. People don't have any understanding of what war is. I really don't think the modern mind can take it in, and I think it's almost been polluted too much to be able to, I think there needs to be some kind of re-education. I don't know what that is. I don't know if that's possible, but I think in order for it to stop, people have to understand what it is. And I think there's an acceptance of it. Otherwise, people, there's people at war, there's people in Afghanistan. People don't really understand what that means.